The road was empty except for the faint shimmer of heat rising from the asphalt. Daniel had been driving for nearly 6 hours trying to make it from northern Arizona to Nevada before midnight. He hated driving at night, but he hated cheap roadside motels even more. The radio kept fading in and out and his phone had no signal. The highway stretched endlessly in front of him, surrounded by dark desert and jagged rock formations. Every few miles there was a rusted sign warning about wildlife crossings, but he had not seen a single car in over 20 minutes. Around 11:30 he noticed headlights in his rearview mirror. At first he felt relieved because another driver meant he was not completely alone. The car behind him stayed at a steady distance for several minutes. Daniel changed lanes slightly to the right to let the car pass, but it did not move. It remained directly behind him like it was glued to his bumper. He increased his speed to 75. The other car matched it perfectly. He slowed down to 60. Again the headlights adjusted and stayed the same distance behind. A nervous feeling crept into his chest. The road ahead curved slightly and there were no exits for at least 30 miles. He decided to test something. He tapped his brakes lightly to see if the driver would react. The headlights flickered, but the car did not attempt to pass. Instead it moved closer, almost touching his rear bumper. Daniel could not make out the make or model because the lights were too bright. It felt intentional, like the driver wanted to stay hidden. He considered pulling over, but the idea of stopping in the middle of the desert at midnight felt worse than continuing. He grabbed his phone again, hoping for a signal, but there was none. The headlights suddenly flashed twice. Daniel flinched. He had heard stories about highway gangs that targeted lone drivers. He tried to calm himself by telling himself it was probably someone impatient. The road narrowed as it entered a canyon area. The walls of rock rose on both sides, blocking any moonlight. The only illumination came from his headlights and the car behind him. That was when he noticed something horrifying. In the brief reflection of his side mirror he saw a second set of headlights far behind the first car. 2 vehicles were now following him. His heart began pounding. The first car accelerated and pulled up beside him on the left. Daniel glanced over and saw a dark SUV with tinted windows. He could not see the driver. The second vehicle closed in from behind, trapping him between them. The SUV began drifting slowly toward his lane, forcing him closer to the right shoulder where gravel and loose stones lined the edge. Daniel realized they were trying to box him in. He slammed on his brakes unexpectedly. The SUV shot ahead and the car behind nearly collided with him. In the chaos Daniel swerved onto the shoulder, kicking up dust and rocks. His car fishtailed, but he managed to keep control. He sped up again, using the sudden confusion to create distance. The SUV made a sharp U-turn ahead and came back toward him, now facing him head-on in his lane. The headlights were blinding. Daniel screamed and jerked the steering wheel to the right, barely avoiding a collision. His tires left the pavement and the car bounced violently over rough ground. He thought he was going to flip. Somehow he regained control and steered back onto the highway. In the rearview mirror both vehicles were now behind him again. The SUV tried to ram his back bumper. The impact jolted his car forward. Daniel lost control for a moment but managed to stay on the road. He realized they were not trying to scare him. They were trying to run him off the highway. Ahead he saw a faint glow in the distance. It looked like a rest stop or gas station. It was his only hope. He pressed the accelerator to the floor, pushing his engine beyond what felt safe. The speedometer climbed past 90. The vehicles followed but began to lag slightly. As he approached the lights he saw it was a small highway patrol checkpoint. 2 police cruisers were parked with emergency lights flashing. Relief flooded through him. He slammed on his horn continuously as he sped toward them. The officers stepped forward, confused by the chaos. The SUV and the second car suddenly veered off at the last second, taking an emergency dirt exit and disappearing into the darkness. Daniel pulled into the checkpoint, shaking uncontrollably. When he tried to explain what happened, the officers immediately searched the area but found nothing. No tire tracks, no vehicles, no evidence that anyone had followed him. It was as if the 2 cars had vanished into thin air. One of the officers looked at him strangely and said they had received multiple reports over the years of drivers being chased through that exact canyon by vehicles that never showed up on traffic cameras. Some believed it was a gang using hidden dirt roads. Others believed something far darker haunted that stretch of highway. Daniel refused to drive at night again. Even now, years later, he still checks his mirrors obsessively because he knows what it feels like to be hunted on an empty road with nowhere to run. The second story comes from a woman named Claire who was traveling alone through rural Pennsylvania during a snowstorm. She had underestimated how quickly the weather would turn. Thick snow began falling, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The highway was coated in ice and most drivers had already exited. Claire kept going because she was only 40 minutes from home. Her windshield wipers struggled against the heavy snow. The world outside looked like a swirling white void. Suddenly her car hit a patch of black ice and spun out of control. She slid across the road and crashed into a shallow ditch. The impact was not severe, but her car was stuck at an angle with the tires half buried in snow. Claire tried calling for help, but there was no signal. She turned on her hazard lights and waited, hoping another driver would pass. 10 minutes went by, then 20. The snow continued falling harder. The temperature inside her car began dropping rapidly. She realized she needed help soon. Through the blizzard she saw a faint shape approaching from down the highway. It was a tow truck. Relief washed over her. The truck pulled over in front of her car, blocking the wind. A man stepped out wearing a heavy coat and hat. His face was partially hidden by a scarf. He walked to her window and tapped gently. Claire lowered it slightly. The man smiled, but there was something off about his expression. It did not reach his eyes. He said he had been patrolling the area looking for stranded drivers and offered to tow her car to a nearby garage. Claire felt uneasy, but she did not have many options. She grabbed her purse and stepped out into the freezing wind. The man insisted she sit inside his tow truck while he attached the chains. Inside the cab it was warm but cluttered with old fast food wrappers and tools. She noticed there was no company logo on the truck. As he worked outside, she glanced around and saw something disturbing on the floor behind her seat. There were multiple cell phones piled together. Some looked old and damaged. Others appeared relatively new. None of them were turned on. Her stomach tightened. She quietly reached for the door handle, but before she could open it, the man climbed back inside. He started the engine and said they needed to drive a few miles to reach his garage. Claire asked where it was located. He gave a vague answer about a private property off the main road. The tow truck began moving, but instead of continuing on the highway it turned onto a narrow unplowed road leading into the woods. Claire felt panic rising. She said she thought her car was supposed to be towed to a public service station. The man ignored her. She pretended to receive a phone call and loudly said into her dead phone that she was in a tow truck heading to a garage near mile marker 22 and that the police should meet them there. The man glanced at her sharply. The truck slowed slightly. Moments later he stopped completely. Without saying a word he opened her door and told her to get out. Snow whipped around them violently. Claire stumbled back onto the road, confused. The man returned to his truck and drove off, leaving her alone in the storm. She managed to find her way back to the highway and eventually another driver stopped and called emergency services. When police searched the wooded road they found no garage, no buildings, and no sign of the tow truck. Reports later revealed that several people had gone missing along that stretch of highway over the past decade. Many were last seen getting assistance from an unmarked tow truck during bad weather. Claire believes the only reason she survived was because she made him think someone knew exactly where she was. To this day she avoids driving in snowstorms and refuses help from unofficial roadside vehicles. The third story was shared by a long-haul truck driver named Marcus who had been on the road for over 15 years. He prided himself on never being afraid of lonely highways. One night while driving through a remote part of Texas he tuned his CB radio to pass the time. The chatter was normal at first, with drivers discussing traffic and weather conditions. Around 2 in the morning the radio crackled with a voice that sounded distorted and strained. The voice repeated a single phrase asking for help at mile marker 183. Marcus checked his GPS. He was approaching mile marker 179. He responded asking what kind of help was needed, but there was only static. A few minutes later the same voice returned clearer, this time begging someone to stop because their car had broken down. Marcus felt conflicted. Company policy discouraged stopping for unknown vehicles at night, but the desperation in the voice sounded real. As he passed mile marker 183 he scanned the roadside. At first he saw nothing. Then his headlights caught the shape of a small sedan parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking weakly. A woman stood beside it waving frantically. Marcus slowed his truck and pulled over ahead of the sedan. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped out. The desert air was unnaturally cold. As he approached the woman he noticed she was not dressed for the weather. She wore a thin white dress that fluttered in the wind. She told him her car had suddenly died and her phone was not working. Marcus offered to let her sit inside his truck while he checked the engine. As they walked toward his truck he realized something strange. Her feet were bare and completely clean despite standing on dusty ground. Inside the cab she sat silently staring straight ahead. Marcus felt increasingly uneasy but tried to remain polite. He stepped back outside to inspect the sedan. When he reached it he noticed the car was covered in a thick layer of dust as if it had been sitting there for months. The hazard lights were not actually blinking. What he had seen from the highway must have been a reflection. A chill ran down his spine. He walked around the vehicle shining his flashlight through the windows. The interior was empty and coated with dust. There were spider webs in the corners. It looked abandoned. Suddenly his CB radio crackled loudly from inside his truck. The distorted voice returned now screaming at him to leave immediately. Marcus sprinted back toward his truck. When he climbed inside the passenger seat was empty. The woman was gone. He scanned the dark highway but saw no one. The desert stretched silent and still. His radio emitted one final burst of static before going quiet. Marcus drove away shaken to his core. Later he learned from another driver that years earlier a woman had died at mile marker 183 after her car broke down. She had attempted to flag down passing vehicles but was struck by a truck whose driver never saw her in time. Since then multiple drivers reported hearing a plea for help on their radios at that exact location. Marcus still drives trucks but he never responds to unexplained voices on the CB radio anymore. The final story involves a college student named Ryan who decided to take a shortcut through an old mountain highway in Colorado to save time during a late-night drive back to campus. The road was rarely used since a newer highway had been built. Signs warned that services were unavailable for 50 miles. Ryan enjoyed the isolation at first. Tall pine trees lined the winding road and fog drifted between them. After about 20 minutes he noticed a pickup truck parked on the side with its hood open. A man stood beside it waving a flashlight. Ryan hesitated but decided to stop. The man looked middle-aged with a thick beard and tired eyes. He said his truck had overheated and asked if Ryan could drive him to the next town 10 miles ahead where there was a gas station. Ryan agreed and the man climbed into the passenger seat. As they drove the man made small talk asking personal questions about where Ryan studied and whether he lived alone. The questions felt intrusive but Ryan answered politely. After several minutes Ryan realized they should have reached the town by now. He had been watching the mile markers and they seemed to be repeating numbers. Mile marker 12 appeared twice. Then mile marker 13 appeared 3 times. He mentioned this to the man who simply smiled and said mountain roads could be confusing at night. The fog thickened making visibility extremely poor. Ryan's GPS lost signal. The radio began emitting soft static. Suddenly the man's demeanor changed. He stopped speaking and stared straight ahead. Ryan felt the temperature inside the car drop noticeably. He glanced at the passenger seat and nearly crashed. The man's reflection in the side mirror did not match his movements. While the real man sat still the reflection was grinning widely. Terrified Ryan slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a stop in the middle of the road. When he turned to confront the passenger seat it was empty. The door was still closed. Panic overwhelmed him. He restarted the car and sped forward blindly through the fog. After what felt like hours he saw headlights approaching from the opposite direction. It was a state trooper. Ryan flagged him down and explained everything. The trooper listened carefully then asked where he had picked up the stranded driver. When Ryan described the location the trooper's face turned pale. He said that stretch of the old mountain highway had been closed for years due to multiple disappearances. Officially it was barricaded but sometimes the barriers were moved by unknown individuals. The trooper escorted Ryan back toward the main highway. As they passed the area where the pickup truck had supposedly been there was nothing. No vehicle, no footprints, no sign anyone had been there. Local legend speaks of a hitchhiker who appears on that mountain road asking for rides. Those who accept often vanish without a trace. Ryan considers himself lucky. He transferred to another university the following semester, unable to shake the memory of the reflection that smiled when the real face did not. These 4 true accounts serve as chilling reminders that highways are not always just stretches of asphalt connecting cities. Sometimes they are corridors of isolation where the normal rules of safety and reality seem to bend. Whether the threats come from human predators or something far harder to explain, the fear they leave behind is very real. If you ever find yourself alone on a dark, empty road and something feels wrong, trust that instinct immediately, because on the highway help is often miles away and sometimes the danger is already right behind you.